On September 16, 2025, the world lost one of its last great cinematic pioneers. Robert Redford, actor, director, activist, and the visionary founder of the Sundance Institute, passed away peacefully at his beloved mountain retreat in Sundance, Utah. He was 89. The news broke with the kind of solemn weight reserved only for cultural giants, and tributes poured in instantly from Hollywood, Washington, and beyond. But grief soon gave way to astonishment. As Redford's family, close friends, and archivists began sorting through his vast estate, they uncovered not only treasures of Hollywood history but also deeply personal artifacts that revealed a man far more layered than the world ever knew. This is not merely the story of Robert Redford's death. It is the story of what he left behind, a living, breathing testament hidden within the walls of his estate. What they found there will leave you speechless. Charles Robert Redford Jr. was born on August 18, 1936, in Santa Monica, California, to Charles and Martha Redford. His father worked as a milkman before finding steady employment as an accountant, and his mother nurtured Robert's creativity and sensitivity. While the Southern California sunshine seemed like a blessing, Redford's early years were marked by both promise and struggle. He was athletic but restless, excelling in baseball and track during high school. Yet underneath, he harbored a yearning for something larger than the suburban rhythm of mid-century California. His father pushed him toward discipline, while his mother encouraged imagination. A balance that would shape his dual identity as both a man of serious purpose and an artist of boundless vision. After briefly attending the University of Colorado on a baseball scholarship, Redford's life shifted dramatically. He lost the scholarship due to excessive drinking, a turning point that forced him to reckon with direction and ambition. Seeking renewal, he traveled through Europe, studying art in Paris and Florence, and absorbing cultural influences that would later define his cinematic aesthetic. Returning to the United States, Redford studied acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York City. From there, he found himself drawn to Broadway, taking early roles that introduced his sharp features, quiet intensity, and unyielding sense of individuality. The foundations of a legend were being set, though at the time, he was simply another young actor hustling through the corridors of Manhattan. By the early 1960s, Robert Redford was more than just another promising actor. His breakthrough role in Barefoot in the Park on Broadway, opposite Elizabeth Ashley, caught Hollywood's attention. Soon after, he transitioned to the screen, carrying with him a rare combination of all-American charm and intellectual seriousness. It was 1969's Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid that catapulted him into superstardom. Playing the Sundance Kid opposite Paul Newman's Butch Cassidy, Redford embodied both charisma and rebellion. The film wasn't just a box office success, it was a cultural landmark, cementing him as the face of a new era in American cinema. The 1970s brought more triumphs. The Sting, 1973, reunited him with Newman, earning him an Academy Award nomination. All the President's Men, 1976, in which he played journalist Bob Woodward, defined Redford as more than an actor. It positioned him as a truth seeker, a figure aligned with accountability and integrity at a time when America was reeling from Watergate. Despite his success, Redford was never entirely comfortable with celebrity. He avoided the trappings of Hollywood excess, retreating instead to his property in Utah, where wilderness provided both solace and clarity. He resisted being typecast as merely a leading man, taking on roles and directing projects that carried deeper social resonance. In a business addicted to glamour, Redford cultivated the role of the reluctant star, handsome yet thoughtful, famous yet private. As the 1970s closed, Redford's ambitions expanded beyond acting. He had grown disillusioned with the commercial machinery of Hollywood, which often stifled creativity in pursuit of box office returns. In 1981, he founded the Sundance Institute, an organization devoted to nurturing independent filmmakers and giving new voices a platform. What began as a small workshop in the Utah mountains soon became a revolution in cinema. The Sundance Film Festival evolved into the most influential showcase of independent film in the world, launching the careers of directors like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Soderbergh, and Darren Aronofsky. Through Sundance, Redford democratized filmmaking, shifting focus away from big studios and toward artistry, diversity, and risk-taking. Meanwhile, his estate in Sundance was more than a residence. It was a sanctuary that embodied his values. Designed with environmental sensitivity, it blended seamlessly into the landscape, surrounded by mountains, streams, and wild forest. Redford often spoke of the estate as his true home, a place where he could live in harmony with nature and cultivate ideas without intrusion. By the time the 1990s arrived, Robert Redford was no longer just a star. He was an institution, a man who had redefined American cinema while safeguarding the environment, advancing social justice, and proving that fame need not eclipse purpose. His estate, even then, was filling quietly with archives, artifacts, and stories that would only come to light after his death. For decades, Robert Redford's Utah estate was the subject of quiet curiosity. Nestled deep in the Wasatch Mountains, his home was not a gilded palace like those of other Hollywood legends. Instead, it was built with simplicity, purpose, and reverence for nature. Wooden beams, large windows framing the wilderness, and sustainable design choices gave the property an authenticity that reflected Redford's personality. The estate was never about luxury, it was about belonging. Redford spoke often about the healing power of nature and how architecture should harmonize with the earth rather than dominate it. Walking through the grounds, one found no ostentatious displays of wealth, but rather small details, reclaimed wood, local stone, and eco-friendly systems that revealed his environmental commitment. It was here, at this very estate, that Redford spent his final days. And it was here, after his passing, that the family began uncovering the treasures that would astonish historians and admirers alike. When Redford's children and close associates began the somber process of sorting through his belongings, they found more than just furniture, photographs, and memorabilia. Hidden within drawers, boxes, and cabinets were fragments of a life dedicated to art, activism, and authenticity. One of the first discoveries was a collection of personal journals. Bound in worn leather, filled with pages of handwritten reflections, the journals offered an intimate portrait of a man who had always guarded his privacy. Within them were musings on the meaning of fame, heartfelt accounts of family joys and sorrows, and detailed reflections on his political and environmental work. His words revealed both vulnerability and resolve, confirming that Redford had been as introspective as he was outwardly charismatic. Alongside the journals were annotated film scripts. Each script bore Redford's meticulous notes, sometimes on character motivation, sometimes critiques of dialogue, and often philosophical observations about storytelling. These documents illuminated how deeply he cared about the integrity of every project he touched. The family also discovered rare photographs, many of them candid shots taken behind the scenes of films like The Sting, Jeremiah Johnson, and Out of Africa. Unlike the polished studio stills that the public knew, these photographs captured quiet moments. Redford laughing with Paul Newman between takes, adjusting a camera on his directorial debut, or standing alone on a mountain slope during breaks in filming. For fans, these images were priceless. For the family, they were personal reminders of the man beyond the screen. As archivists began opening boxes stored in a study on the estate, they stumbled upon one of the most significant finds, the hidden archives of Sundance. Here were folders upon folders of documents related to the festival's earliest days, applications from aspiring filmmakers, handwritten rejection notes, and letters of encouragement signed by Redford himself. Many submissions were from now-famous directors, their youthful dreams preserved in faded paper. Quentin Tarantino's handwritten pitch, Steven Soderbergh's early notes, and correspondence with a young Ava DuVernay were among the gems. There were also reels of film, carefully labeled but never before screened publicly. Some were test footage, others short films submitted to the festival that had never seen the light of day. Together, they formed a time capsule of independent cinema's evolution under Redford's guardianship. But perhaps most telling were Redford's personal notes on the role of Sundance. In private memos, he wrote about his desire to democratize filmmaking and to give underrepresented voices a chance to be heard. He worried about Hollywood's increasing focus on profit over substance and saw Sundance as his answer. A place where art could flourish without compromise. These discoveries did more than honor Redford's memory, they redefined his impact. He was not only the face of Sundance but also its tireless guardian, quietly curating and protecting a cultural revolution. Though Robert Redford was celebrated worldwide for his acting and directing, what many never realized was that art had been his first love. Before Hollywood, before Broadway, before the weight of fame, Redford had dreamed of being a painter. His travels through Europe as a young man had instilled in him a passion for fine art, and though life pulled him toward the screen, the brush and canvas never left his side. In a secluded wing of his Utah estate, the family uncovered an entire studio. Canvases leaned against the walls, some finished, some in progress, many unsigned. The paintings revealed an artist of surprising depth, landscapes of Utah's mountains painted in soft pastels, abstract portraits capturing human struggle, and vivid works inspired by his time abroad in France and Italy. Alongside his own work, Redford had assembled a private collection of Native American art and artifacts. Pottery, woven textiles, and ceremonial pieces were carefully catalogued, some gifted to him by tribal leaders he had collaborated with on conservation efforts. This collection reflected his respect for indigenous traditions and his desire to preserve cultures too often ignored or erased by mainstream America. What made this discovery striking was not the sheer value of the works, but their intimacy. The art studio was not a gallery designed to impress, it was a retreat, a sacred space where Redford allowed himself to create without the judgment of critics or audiences. In those paintings and collections lay the essence of a man who, despite immense fame, longed for the private joy of creation. Among the boxes stored in the estate's library were bundles of letters, many neatly tied with ribbon, others tucked into envelopes yellowed with age. These letters, once read, sent ripples through Hollywood, politics, and Redford's family alike. The correspondence with Paul Newman was particularly moving. The two men, bound by friendship and shared ideals, had exchanged letters filled with humor, candor, and deep respect. In one, Newman thanked Redford for keeping me honest, while Redford confessed that Newman's friendship had anchored him through the chaos of stardom. These exchanges revealed a bond far richer than what the public saw in their on-screen camaraderie. Letters from Barbra Streisand, written during the making of The Way We Were, carried both professional admiration and personal warmth. She praised his discipline and confided in him about her own struggles with Hollywood's expectations. Redford's replies were measured, kind, and sometimes tinged with the loneliness of a man who never fully embraced the spotlight. Perhaps most surprising were the political letters. Carefully preserved were exchanges with U.S. presidents, including Jimmy Carter, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. Redford discussed environmental policy, conservation efforts, and even the moral responsibility of cinema in shaping public opinion. These letters, once private, demonstrated his influence as not just a Hollywood figure, but a statesman of ideas. The most delicate letters, however, were those addressed to family. Redford had written to his late son, Scott, who died at age 16 from sudden infant death syndrome. In these heartbreaking notes, he spoke of grief, love, and the pain of loss that never left him. For the family, reading those letters was both devastating and healing, a reminder of the father who had carried sorrow quietly, even as the world celebrated him. If one theme defined Robert Redford's later life, it was his unwavering commitment to the environment. For decades, he had been one of the most vocal celebrity advocates for conservation, climate action, and the protection of public lands. But what the estate revealed was the sheer extent of his dedication, plans and projects far more ambitious than the public ever knew. In his study, archivists discovered large maps spread with handwritten notes and markings. These were not merely decorative, they were blueprints for ecological initiatives. One set of maps detailed efforts to protect the Colorado River Basin. Another outlined potential wildlife corridors in the Rocky Mountains, drawn up with scientists Redford had supported. There were also proposals for renewable energy projects, letters to activists coordinating protests against drilling in national parks, and drafts of speeches he had never delivered. His notes carried urgency, almost prophetic in tone, warning of the dangers of unchecked climate change decades before it became a global talking point. Perhaps most remarkable was a sealed folder labeled simply Future Generations. Inside were essays Redford had written about humanity's responsibility to the planet. Some were poetic, others fiercely pragmatic, but all carried the voice of a man who believed his greatest legacy was not on film, but in preserving the earth. The estate confirmed what many suspected: Robert Redford was more than an actor, more than a director, more than even a cultural icon. He was a crusader for the environment, leaving behind not just a body of work, but a roadmap for future generations to follow. As investigators and curators carefully catalogued Robert Redford's estate, they stumbled upon a treasure trove that seemed to bring Hollywood's golden years back to life. Hidden in climate-controlled storage were costumes, props, and reels from some of his most iconic films. Among the discoveries was the weathered baseball glove used in The Natural, complete with handwritten notes Redford had scribbled during filming to remind himself of Roy Hobbs' inner motivations. Costumes from out of Africa, carefully preserved, spoke of a time when cinema was less about spectacle and more about story. Even more astonishing were reels of behind-the-scenes footage, unreleased glimpses of Redford laughing with Meryl Streep, debating shots with Sidney Pollack, and rehearsing scenes that never made it into the final cuts. But perhaps the most surprising find was evidence of projects never completed. Scripts marked with Redford's handwriting hinted at ideas he had hoped to bring to the screen: an unfinished western, a political drama, and a personal project about his own Utah roots. These discoveries revealed that even in his final years, Redford was still dreaming, still creating. Beyond the Hollywood artifacts, the most poignant discoveries were deeply personal. Tucked inside an old cedar chest were belongings connected to his late son, Scott, who tragically passed away in 1959 at the age of 2.5. A pair of tiny shoes, a lock of hair, and photographs few had ever seen were preserved with care, evidence of the grief Redford carried throughout his life. There were also journals filled with handwritten letters addressed to his daughters, Shauna, Amy, and Dylan, reflecting the father behind the legend. Each letter captured moments of advice, encouragement, and raw honesty. In one, he wrote about the balance between art and responsibility. In another, he admitted his regrets about the time Hollywood took away from family. The family released a joint statement acknowledging these findings. "Our father lived a life larger than most, but he never stopped being a dad," they said. What has been found in his estate reminds us of the man behind the actor, the storyteller, the father, and the dreamer. These words underscored the emotional weight of the discoveries and deepened the world's appreciation for the complexity of Redford's legacy. Alongside the artifacts and personal mementos was the staggering scope of Robert Redford's financial fortune. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at hundreds of millions of dollars, an accumulation of decades of acting, directing, real estate investments, and his entrepreneurial ventures. But true to character, Redford's will revealed a man committed to giving back. Significant portions of his estate were earmarked for charitable causes. The Sundance Institute, which he founded in 1981 to support independent filmmaking, stood as the primary beneficiary. Millions were directed toward ensuring future generations of filmmakers had the resources to tell their stories. Environmental organizations also featured prominently in his final wishes. Redford, a lifelong activist, instructed that land in Utah and parts of California be preserved and protected. He had quietly purchased acres of wilderness throughout his life, and these lands were to remain untouched, serving as a living tribute to his love of nature. It was also revealed that Redford had established trusts for his children and grandchildren, carefully structured to protect their privacy and encourage them to live independently rather than rely solely on inherited wealth. In life and death, he continued to balance family responsibility with a sense of greater purpose. Robert Redford's final days were spent at his Sundance home in Utah, the place that had long been his sanctuary. On September 16, 2025, he passed away peacefully, surrounded by family. No official cause of death was released, though sources close to the family described it as a natural and calm passing. The house itself reflected his essence, rustic but refined, adorned with Native American art, family photographs, and windows that opened onto sweeping views of the Wasatch Mountains. Those who were with him in his final hours recall a serene atmosphere. His children gathered, his favorite music softly playing, the mountain air drifting through open windows. He had lived to be 89, and though his health had quietly declined in recent years, he remained mentally sharp and deeply engaged with his work, his activism, and his family. For those closest to him, the peace of his passing felt like the closing of a beautiful but demanding novel. The news of Robert Redford's death sent shockwaves across the globe. Within hours, tributes poured in from fellow actors, directors, politicians, environmentalists, and fans. Meryl Streep, who had starred opposite him in Out of Africa, described him as a partner in art, a true gentleman, and a friend who carried light with him wherever he went. Martin Scorsese praised Redford's contribution to independent cinema, calling Sundance the beating heart of storytelling, and crediting Redford for nurturing voices that might otherwise have been silenced. Jane Fonda, both a friend and colleague, recalled their activism together, saying, "He believed in change not for himself, but for the world we leave behind." Politicians also joined in paying tribute. Messages from former US presidents and world leaders highlighted not only his cinematic achievements but also his lifelong fight for the environment. Environmental groups organized candlelight vigils, many of them held outdoors, in forests and parks he had fought to protect. Fans, too, made their voices heard. From small towns in Utah to cities across Europe and Asia, people gathered to watch his films, celebrate his life, and grieve together. Online, millions shared favorite quotes, film scenes, and personal reflections, proving that Redford's influence transcended borders, generations, and industries. Walking through Robert Redford's estate was like moving through a living museum of a man who seemed larger than life yet deeply personal in his vision. Beyond the wealth and fame, his writings and journals revealed his most intimate reflections on mortality and legacy. In several leather-bound notebooks, Redford wrote candidly about how he hoped to be remembered, not simply as a movie star, but as a man who valued truth, art, and the natural world. "Fame is a shadow," one entry read. "It follows you until the light changes. What matters is the work you've done in the daylight." His estate revealed more than material possessions, it was a map of his values. The way he left land to conservation efforts, resources to independent filmmakers, and carefully considered trusts for family showed that he saw his death not as an end but as a continuation of his lifelong mission. In every sense, the estate itself became his truest testament, a reflection of the life he wanted to live long after he was gone. The items discovered inside Redford's estate forced both fans and historians to reconsider his legacy. His private notes offered a behind-the-scenes view of a man constantly wrestling with his place in Hollywood. He wrote openly of his doubts about fame, his frustrations with studios, and his ongoing battle to balance commerce with art. These revelations reframed Redford not only as a Hollywood icon but as a visionary who understood the fragility of creativity in an industry obsessed with profit. His dedication to independent voices through Sundance wasn't merely a career side project, it was a rebellion against an industry that he feared was losing its soul. For younger generations of artists, these discoveries were nothing short of inspiring. Directors and actors who once thought of Redford as distant and untouchable now saw him as someone who faced the same fears and uncertainties they did. Hollywood history, once content to see him as the golden boy, now had to reckon with him as a reformer whose impact was far deeper than the box office. Among the most consequential aspects of his estate were the financial endowments he had set in motion long before his passing. Redford's plans for Sundance guaranteed its long-term sustainability. Substantial funds were allocated not only to continue the annual Sundance Film Festival but also to expand educational programs, filmmaker labs, and international collaborations. Environmental causes also saw a surge of renewed energy. The estate revealed multi-million-dollar donations designated for organizations combating climate change, protecting water resources, and preserving public lands. Redford had quietly funneled resources into these causes for decades, but the full scope of his philanthropy only came to light after his death. The ripple effects were immediate. Several environmental projects announced expansions funded directly by Redford's estate. Independent filmmakers across the globe spoke about how Sundance had shaped their careers, and now, with new resources, countless more voices would be nurtured. Even after his passing, Redford's influence expanded outward, touching communities far beyond Hollywood. Perhaps the most striking revelations from the estate were the deeply personal writings that revealed Robert Redford's vulnerabilities. Though he projected strength and composure in public, his private journals painted a more complex portrait. He wrote candidly about the toll fame took on his family life, the grief of losing his son Scott, and the quiet struggles of aging. One entry described how difficult it was to remain private in an age of constant exposure. "I gave the world my art, but I kept my life behind a fence." Sometimes, though, the fence was not high enough. Yet even in these struggles, Redford's purpose never wavered. He spoke of art as healing, nature as sanctuary, and storytelling as a way to bring humanity closer together. The estate reminded everyone that behind the legend was a man who bore scars, carried regrets, and searched for meaning, just as any human would. Not all of Redford's estate was clear or complete. Among the catalogued items were unfinished works, unsent letters, and incomplete art projects that hinted at stories the world may never fully know. There were film scripts with only the first few scenes written, sketches for paintings left half-finished, and letters addressed to unnamed recipients that were never mailed. Some scholars believe these fragments represent projects he had intended to pursue but abandoned due to time, health, or changing circumstances. One particularly intriguing discovery was a handwritten outline for a film based loosely on his own life, a story about a young man torn between the glare of fame and the call of the wilderness. Whether Redford ever intended to complete it remains a mystery, but it leaves behind tantalizing questions for historians and fans alike. These incomplete pieces add a layer of enigma to his legacy. They remind us that even a man who seemed to have accomplished everything left things unfinished, dreams unfulfilled, and words unsaid. The mysteries within his estate may never be solved, but they ensure that Robert Redford's story will continue to spark curiosity, debate, and admiration for generations to come. Robert Redford's estate is more than a collection of possessions. It is a narrative of his life, carefully written in objects, letters, films, and land. Unlike the roles he played on screen, this story was unscripted, raw, and profoundly human. From family mementos that captured the love and grief he carried, to the philanthropic blueprints that continue to shape the future, the discoveries ensure that his presence will never vanish. In many ways, his estate is his final and greatest masterpiece. It tells the story of a man who refused to be defined solely by Hollywood stardom, who carved out a space where art and activism could thrive, and who believed that the beauty of the world was worth both preserving and celebrating. Though death has silenced his voice, his estate continues to speak. Each artifact, each journal, each act of generosity whispers the values he lived by. For fans and family alike, what they found in Robert Redford's estate will not only leave them speechless, it will ensure that his memory, like the landscapes he fought to protect, endures far beyond his time on Earth. If you were moved by this story and want to keep discovering more videos about the lives and legacies of icons like Robert Redford, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more untold stories to light, keeping the memory of legends alive for generations to come.